Over the past few weeks, tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran appear to have cooled. Washington chose not to strike Iran in January.
Protests inside Iran have faded, and diplomacy, at least on paper, is back on the agenda, but this comm is misleading. Behind the scenes, both the US and Israel continue to see clear upside in military action against Iran. In fact, the probability of strikes before the end of April is high, roughly 65%.
So in this video, I want to answer 6 questions. Why the threat of force hasn't gone away?
What kind of strike is actually being considered? Why Trump is central to this calculus? What could trigger escalation or stop it? And what this means for oil markets and regional stability. Why January's de-escalation doesn't change the trajectory. The key point is this: January's restraint was tactical, not strategic. The US is already repositioning military assets in the Middle East. At least one aircraft carrier will be in place by the end of January, and possibly a second soon after. This is not routine signaling, it's preparation. Israel's position hasn't changed either. From Jerusalem's perspective, Iran's missile and drone programs remain the most immediate existential threat. Those capabilities continue to expand, and time does not work in Israel's favor. In January, Israeli leadership urged caution, not because the threat had diminished, but because Israel was not confident it could absorb a major Iranian retaliation alone. As US assets flow back into the region, that constraint eases. Put simply, capability is catching up with intent.
Donald Trump's view of force is a proven tool.
His approach to Iran is shaped by one defining experience: using force worked. His decision to strike Iran's nuclear program in June 2025 crossed a line no previous US president had been willing to cross, and it produced almost no domestic political backlash. That matters enormously. Trump's base broadly supports military action as long as it is 1. Decisive, 2. Time-limited, and 3. Does not drag the US into another prolonged war. From Trump's perspective, there is actually more downside risk in doing nothing. Allowing threats to go unenforced damages credibility, and credibility is central to how Trump views power. Right now, the immediate political pressure has eased because protests in Iran have subsided. But if protests resume, even briefly, or Iran refuses to meaningfully engage in talks, Trump will have ample justification to act.
And unlike diplomacy, force is something Trump trusts. The timing window is key. April matters. Strikes could technically happen at any moment.
But a rushed operation is unlikely. The more probable sequence is 1. Asset build-up, 2. A period of stalled or failed diplomacy, 3. A triggering event, protests, Iranian defiance, or regional provocation. That points to a strike window. Earliest, mid-February, most likely, March, latest, before the 30th of April. Waiting serves two purposes. It allows the US and Israel to fully prepare, and it strengthens the political case that all other options were exhausted. This is not about urgency. It's about legitimacy.
What kind of strike is actually likely? This is where expectations often diverge from reality.
A purely symbolic strike, like the limited January action, is now unlikely. The scale of US force deployment suggests something more serious. At the same time, a full-scale campaign aimed at regime change, also unlikely. That would require sustained US involvement, regional buy-in that does not exist, and acceptance of major oil market disruption. The most likely scenario sits in between. Strikes on missile infrastructure, air defense systems, command and control nodes, and select military targets. The objective would be degradation and deterrence, not collapse. Iran's likely response and the escalation risk. Iran will almost certainly retaliate. US and Israeli planners believe they can manage missile and drone threats, especially with expanded force posture. But escalation risk rises quickly under two conditions: significant casualties or damage that threatens regime stability. If Iran's leadership believes survival is at stake, it is likely to consider more asymmetric and escalatory options, including actions against regional energy flows. That's the real red line for markets: disruption near the Strait of Hormuz, attacks on energy infrastructure, or prolonged regional instability. Even a limited Iranian response could have outsized psychological and price impacts. Those strikes might still be avoided. Despite all of this, military action is not inevitable. There are meaningful constraints. Apart from Israel, there is little regional support for renewed strikes. Gulf states are deeply opposed to escalation, and there is no clear end state that military action would achieve. Short of a sustained campaign, strikes will not fundamentally weaken the Iranian regime, and Trump is unlikely to accept the domestic and economic costs of a prolonged conflict, especially if oil prices spike sharply. This is why there remains roughly a 25% probability that Trump opts for continued pressure, threats, and sanctions rather than kinetic action.
So here, the bottom line. The likelihood of US or Israeli strikes on Iran before the end of April is high.
Any action would likely be targeted and limited, but not symbolic. Retaliation is almost certain, escalation is not. And the biggest constraint isn't military. It's political, economic, and strategic. This is a classic case of high conviction, but constrained execution, which is exactly why uncertainty remains elevated, and that uncertainty is what markets, allies, and Iran itself are now forced to price in.